Chapter 1. I was 36 years old when the school called and said my daughter had been abandoned. I did not have a daughter. I had never been pregnant, never given birth, never signed up for a school yet. They had my name, my address, my signature, and a 4-year-old girl waiting in an empty classroom. What I did not know yet was that someone had built a family using my body, erased me from my own child's life, and expected me to stay quiet forever. My work days are monotonous, starting in the morning and ending in the evening, and after each workday, the only thing that awaits me is a quiet apartment and the hum of the refrigerator. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, work as a civil engineering architect, and my schedule is packed months in advance with planning meetings and client reviews. I don't have children. I've never been pregnant. I don't babysit. I don't volunteer at school. I'm careful about boundaries in my life because I like to know exactly where I stand. That was why the phone call felt wrong before I even understood the words. A phone call came to me shortly after 4:30 p.m. on Tuesday. I was still sitting at my desk reviewing floor plans with headphones on, catching glimpses of voicemails from a contractor who never reads emails. The phone vibrated on the wooden desk and I almost ignored it. It was a local number but unfamiliar, and I had learned a painful lesson. Strange numbers often want something from me. I answered anyway. The woman on the other end of the line had a professional, calm voice, like someone trained to maintain neutrality. She said she was calling from the Maple Grove Early Childhood Education Center. She asked if I was speaking to Claire Rowan. I replied yes. Then she told me that my daughter had not been picked up after dismissal and had been waiting for several hours. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. I actually glanced down at my phone as if the screen might explain the mistake. I told her she had the wrong person. I said I did not have a daughter. I said I did not have any children at all. There was a pause, not a long one, but long enough to feel deliberate. She said my full name again, first, middle, last. She read out my home address. She confirmed my date of birth. She told me that according to their records, I was listed as the child's mother and primary guardian. I told her there had to be an error. I said I had never enrolled a child in any school. I said I had never even toured their building. I said I had no idea who she was talking about. Her tone did not change. She explained that they had already attempted to reach the emergency contacts listed in the file. No one had answered. She said that under state guidelines, if no guardian arrived soon, they would have to escalate the situation. I asked her what escalate meant. She said it meant contacting Child Protective Services to ensure the child was not abandoned. That was the word that made my stomach drop. Not missing, not delayed, abandoned. I felt heat rush to my face. I told her again that I was not the child's mother. I said she was talking about someone else. I said she needed to double-check her system. She told me she had. She said my identification number was attached to the record. She said my signature was on the enrollment forms. She said she understood that this was upsetting, but the child was still there and time was passing. I asked how old the child was. She said 4. I stared at the blueprint on my desk and tried to make sense of a world where that sentence existed. I was 36. 4 years ago, I had been managing a highway expansion project and living alone in a different apartment. I had records. I had emails. I had calendars. There was no version of my life that included a 4-year-old. I told her I would come to the school. I said it without thinking it through. As soon as the words left my mouth, I felt something tighten in my chest. I was not agreeing because I believed her. I was agreeing because I could hear the implication beneath everything she was saying. If I did not show up, the system would make a decision without me. And once a decision like that was written down, it would follow my name whether it was true or not. After we hung up, I sat still for a few seconds. My office felt too quiet. I could hear the air conditioning click on. I could hear someone laughing down the hall. The world had not shifted to match what I was feeling. I packed my bag and told my project manager I had a family emergency. The lie tasted strange in my mouth, but it was easier than explaining something I did not understand myself. On the drive over, my mind kept circling the same thought. This was a mistake. Systems made mistakes, databases glitched, people shared names, someone had typed something wrong, and it had snowballed into this. I repeated that to myself at every red light. Still, another part of my mind was louder. It reminded me of how easily women were judged when it came to children, how quickly a story could form without your consent, how hard it was to erase an accusation once it existed on paper. I did not care about legal consequences in that moment. I cared about reputation. I cared about what it would mean if a report existed somewhere with my name attached to the word abandoned. I cared about the way that single word could rewrite everything I had worked to build. As I pulled into the school parking lot, I noticed how ordinary it looked. Brick walls, a playground with brightly colored equipment, a banner announcing a fall fundraiser. It was the kind of place parents took pictures in front of on the first day of school. I sat in my car for a moment with the engine running. My hands were tight on the steering wheel. I told myself again that this was administrative, that I would walk in, explain the error, and walk out. That this would become an anecdote I would tell later about the strangest phone call I ever received. I turned off the engine and stepped out into the late afternoon air. Children's voices echoed faintly from somewhere behind the building. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the pavement. As I walked toward the entrance, I felt an unfamiliar weight settle over me. Not fear exactly, something closer to responsibility, the kind you do not ask for but cannot ignore once it is placed in front of you. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, still believing I was about to correct a simple mistake. Chapter 2. The front office smelled faintly of disinfectant and crayons. A woman with a laminated badge greeted me and asked me to wait. Her voice was polite but firm, the kind of tone people use when they are already managing a situation and do not have time for questions. She told me a teacher would bring the child out in a moment. She said child the way you say responsibility. I sat down in a molded plastic chair with my bag still over my shoulder. The room was quiet except for a clock ticking on the wall and the hum of a printer behind the counter. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I kept telling myself that this was a clerical error. Someone else's paperwork had slipped under my name. Any second now, they would realize it and apologize. Then the door to the hallway opened. A little girl stepped into the room holding a woman's hand. She was small for her age, with dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail and a backpack that looked too heavy for her shoulders. She stopped walking the moment she saw me. She let go of the woman's hand and stared. I stood up without realizing I was doing it. There was nothing dramatic about her face at first glance. No exact mirror, no obvious explanation. But the longer I looked, the more my skin began to prickle. Her eyes were the same shape as mine, not just brown, but the particular soft brown that shifted in different light. When she frowned, it pulled her mouth in the same uneven way mine did. She lifted her hand to her chin, nervous. That was when I saw it. A faint line just below her lip, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. A small scar. The same place I had one from falling on the steps outside my childhood home. I felt cold all at once. The woman beside her said that this was Lila. She said Lila had been waiting patiently and asked if I was ready to take her home. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say anything, the girl took a step toward me. She said, "Mom." Not loudly, not as a question, just a fact. The sound of it hit me harder than any accusation could have. My knees felt weak. I looked at the woman, then at the front desk, expecting someone to correct her. No one did. I shook my head and said that there had been a mistake. I said I was not her mother. I said I did not know this child. Lila's face crumpled for just a second before she caught herself. She stared at the floor, then back at me, as if trying to figure out what she had said wrong. The woman with the badge led us back into the office. She pulled out a folder and laid it on the counter. She turned it so I could see. The name on the top was mine, my full name, my address, my phone number. Under relationship, it said mother. She flipped to the last page and pointed to the signature line. It looked like my handwriting, the slant of the letters, the curve of the R, the way I crossed my T. I said that someone must have forged it. She nodded, not agreeing or disagreeing. She said that was something to address later. Right now, her responsibility was the child. According to their records, I was the legal guardian. They had verified my identification against the file. They had contacted the emergency numbers listed. No one else had come. She said that if I chose not to take Lila home, the next step would be to contact Child Protective Services so they could place her somewhere safe for the night. I looked down at Lila. She was sitting on a chair now, her legs swinging slightly because they did not reach the floor. She clutched one strap of her backpack with both hands. Her eyes kept flicking toward me, then away like she was afraid of hoping too much. I asked if her father was listed. The woman said yes. She said the name. I did not recognize it. She said they had called him as well. No answer. I felt something shift inside me then. This was no longer about whether I was right. This was about what would happen to a 4-year-old if I walked out of that building. I told the woman that I would take her home for the night. I said it carefully, choosing my words. I said this was temporary. I said I was not admitting anything. She nodded again. She said she understood. She said she would make a note that I was assuming care due to an unresolved records issue. She handed me a clipboard and asked me to sign. My hand shook as I wrote my name. It felt like signing a document in a dream. Lila stood up as soon as she saw me finish. She walked over and slipped her hand into mine. Her fingers were warm and small and confident. She asked quietly if we were going home now. I told her yes. We walked out together. The late afternoon sun made her squint. She climbed into the back seat without being asked and buckled herself in. She curled up against the door and was asleep before I had backed out of the parking lot. I drove with both hands tight on the wheel. The radio was off. The road stretched ahead of me, familiar and suddenly unfamiliar at the same time. I watched her in the rearview mirror as she slept. Her chest rose and fell steadily. One of her shoes had slipped off and was dangling by the strap. I tried to tell myself again that this was a mistake, but another thought crept in, unwelcome and persistent. What if it was not? Chapter 3. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of a small hand slipping into mine, like it was still there. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds coming from the other room. The soft creak of the hallway floor, the faint hum of the nightlight I had plugged in without thinking. I had bought it at a gas station on the way home because the idea of a dark room felt wrong. Sometime after midnight, I heard a whimper. I sat up instantly. My heart was already racing by the time I reached the doorway. Lila was sitting up in the guest bed, her hair stuck to her forehead, eyes wide and unfocused. She looked at me like she had been expecting me to disappear. "I had a bad dream," she said. Her voice was small and hoarse, like she had been crying before she woke up. I sat on the edge of the bed and told her she was safe. I did not know if that was true, but I said it anyway. She asked if she could sleep with the light on. I said yes. She asked if I was going to leave in the morning. No, I said too quickly. Then I softened it. Not without telling you. She nodded, like that was enough. It was not, but she accepted it. When she finally fell back asleep, I stayed there longer than I needed to. I watched her chest rise and fall. I counted breaths. I wondered how someone could look so certain of something that made no sense. Back in my bedroom, I opened my laptop. If this was a mistake, it would show up in the records. My life was documented in ways that were impossible to erase. Work calendars, emails, travel confirmations, timesheets. I started with the year she was born, 2021. I pulled up my work schedule from that year. I had been leading a municipal redevelopment project in downtown Madison. Long days, on-site meetings, weekly progress reports. There were photographs of me in hard hats standing on half-poured concrete, my name printed on safety vests. I scrolled through emails, client updates, contractor disputes, 100 small decisions that left a paper trail. There was no gap, no unexplained leave, no medical absence. I opened my travel history. I had been in Milwaukee in March, Chicago in June, back and forth across the state for inspections. I remembered the exhaustion of that year clearly. There had been no pregnancy hidden inside it. I leaned back in my chair and pressed my fingers to my temples. I told myself this meant the hospital record was wrong, that someone had used my name, that it would be messy but fixable. The next morning, after dropping Lila off at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a cartoon playing softly, I called the number listed on the discharge summary the school had given me. St. Anne's Women Hospital. The woman who answered sounded tired but polite. I told her my name. I told her I had questions about a record associated with me. There was a pause while she typed. She asked me to verify my date of birth, then my address. Then she said, I do see a discharge record under your name from August 2021. My throat tightened. That can't be right, I said. I was not a patient there. She said she understood. She said due to privacy regulations, she could not discuss details over the phone, but she could confirm limited information. She told me the record indicated a live birth. Female infant, mother listed as Evelyn Hartwell, father not identified. I asked her how that was possible. She said she could not speculate. She said if I believed there was an error, I could request a formal review. I asked if there were any notes. She hesitated, then said there was a nursing note indicating the patient had requested confidentiality due to safety concerns. The phrase, protect the child, was mentioned. I hung up and sat there staring at the wall. Protect the child. I had no memory of saying those words, no memory of being afraid, no memory of being in that hospital at all. Lila wandered into the room while I was still sitting there. She climbed onto the chair across from me and watched my face. Are you mad at me? She asked. No, I said immediately. Of course not. She studied me like she was not sure she believed that. My daddy said you would come, she said. My chest tightened. When did he say that? She shrugged. Before. Before when? Before he left. I asked her where he went. She shook her head. I asked her his name. She said she did not remember. That afternoon, I called my mother. I told her what had happened. Not all of it, but enough. There was a long silence on the line. People will talk, she said finally. You know how this looks. I don't care how it looks, I said. I need to know what's true. She told me to be careful. She told me to think about my career. She told me sometimes it was better not to dig too deep. My father did not say much when I spoke to him later. He listened. He sighed. He said it was strange. He said he was sure it would work itself out. No one said they would help. That night after Lila went to bed, I ordered a DNA test online. It was not the kind used in court. I knew that. But I needed to know before I took another step. I needed an anchor. The results came back a week later. 99.9% probability of maternity. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and read it over and over until the words blurred. That was when the memory surfaced. Not all at once, just a fragment. A waiting room, pale walls, a clipboard with forms I had skimmed. The name Marcus Reed on the line beside mine. 2019. We had talked about freezing my eggs then, about options, about timing. I closed my eyes and felt the shape of the truth begin to form. Someone had lived a life in my name, and they had done it on purpose. Chapter 4. Someone had lived a life in my name, and they had done it on purpose. Once that thought settled, it stopped being abstract. It became logistical, timelines, access, motive. I spread everything out on my dining table after Lila went to bed. Hospital paperwork, school enrollment copies, the DNA results, my own calendars from the past 5 years. I was not looking for feelings anymore. I was looking for proof. The dates lined up too cleanly to be coincidence. 2019 was when I had frozen my eggs. I remembered the appointment clearly, the bright white office, the consent forms, the discussions about future options. It had been framed as empowerment, as control. 2020 was when the pregnancy would have happened. 2021, the birth. 2024, the school enrollment. It was a straight line drawn through my life without my knowledge. The name that kept appearing in the margins was Marcus Reed. I had not spoken to Marcus in years. We had dated briefly, long enough to talk about futures and children in that abstract way people do when they think time is on their side. He worked in biotech then, ambitious, charming, always talking about innovation like it excused everything else. I found his name attached to a limited liability company registered 2 years ago. A startup focused on reproductive technology partnerships, nothing illegal on paper, plenty of influence behind the scenes. I called a lawyer the next morning. Helen Brooks met me in her office downtown. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. "This is not a common case," she said. I figured I said. She explained the risks calmly. Assisted reproduction laws varied by state. Consent forms could be manipulated. Surrogacy agreements could be buried under layers of contracts. She said if Marcus had planned this carefully, he would have anticipated resistance. He might try to slow everything down, she said. Delay hearings, dispute jurisdiction. I asked her if what he had done was a crime. She paused. It may not be criminal in the way people expect, but it is a serious violation, especially if consent was falsified. That word stayed with me. Violation. At work, things began to shift. I was called into a meeting with Human Resources after a client mentioned seeing me leave early multiple days in a row. They asked if everything was all right. They asked if I was under unusual stress. I told them I was handling a family matter. They exchanged looks. One of them said they wanted to make sure I was fit to continue leading the project. Not accusatory, just cautious. I nodded and told them I understood. Inside, I felt the walls closing in. At home, Lila watched me closely. She asked if I was going to work tomorrow. She asked if I would come back. I always come back, I told her. She nodded, but did not look convinced. That night, I hired a private investigator. Caleb Monroe was recommended by Helen. Former law enforcement. Quiet. Precise. He asked for everything I had and told me not to contact Marcus directly yet. He expects silence, Caleb said. People like him always do. But I could not wait. I called Marcus the next afternoon. He answered on the second ring. Evelyn, he said like he had been expecting me. I told him we needed to talk. We met at a cafe halfway between our offices. He looked exactly the same. Well-dressed, relaxed, like nothing in his life had been disrupted. I asked him how long he had planned it. He did not pretend not to understand. You weren't ready, he said. I was. That was not your decision, I said. He smiled slightly. It was the most efficient solution. I asked him if he had forged my signature. He shrugged. You signed enough forms back then. What difference does one more make? I felt something cold settle in my chest. You used my body without my consent. He leaned forward. I gave you a child. Most women would be grateful. That was when I knew there would be no apology, no regret. In his mind, this was not theft. It was strategy. When I stood up to leave, he told me I was overreacting. He said courts were slow. He said children needed stability. He said dragging this out would only hurt the little girl. I went home shaking. Lila was waiting at the door. She wrapped her arms around my legs and asked if I was mad. No, I said. I'm not mad at you. She pressed her face into my sweater. "You won't go away," she said. "I won't," I told her. And for the first time, I said it without hesitation. Caleb called later that night. He had confirmed Marcus's involvement through internal emails and vendor records. The evidence was there. It was just buried. Helen filed the initial motions the next morning. The process would be slow. Marcus would fight. But the truth was no longer just mine. As I tucked Lila into bed, I realized something that surprised me. This was not about a broken relationship. It was about control, about a man who believed my silence was consent, and I was done being quiet. Chapter 5. I stopped waiting for things to resolve themselves after that. Once the truth had a shape, I realized how much damage silence had already done. Not just to me, but to a 4-year-old who had learned to live inside someone else's decision. I shifted from reacting to preparing. Every conversation became deliberate. Every document mattered. I learned quickly that the system does not respond to outrage. It responds to order. The hearing was scheduled for early February 2025 in Dane County Family Court. The date felt unreal when I wrote it down, like something that belonged to another version of my life. Until then, everything moved slowly and all at once. Paperwork, motions, declarations. Helen walked me through each step, explaining what would matter and what would not. She warned me that this would not be cinematic, that there would be no dramatic speeches, that most of it would feel painfully ordinary. She was right. The courthouse was quiet in the way government buildings always are. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, a security guard who barely looked up as we passed through. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so small and unremarkable could hold so much weight. Marcus arrived with 2 attorneys. They spoke to him in low voices, leaning in close. He looked composed, almost bored, like this was an inconvenience rather than a reckoning. When his eyes finally met mine, there was no anger there, just calculation. Lila was not present. That had been my decision. I did not want her memory of this chapter to include hard benches and strangers talking about her life like a case file. Helen sat beside me. Caleb sat a few rows back. He gave me a slight nod when I turned around. It was grounding to know I was not alone in the room, even if the system pretended neutrality. When the judge entered, everyone stood. He was older than I expected, with reading glasses perched low on his nose. He did not waste time. He did not perform authority. He simply began. The first matter addressed was parentage. The court ordered genetic test was entered into the record. The numbers were read aloud in a flat voice. Maternity established beyond reasonable doubt. I felt something loosen in my chest hearing it said publicly, not as an accusation or a secret, but as a fact. Next came the consent forms. Helen presented the originals from the fertility clinic alongside the documents Marcus had submitted. The differences were subtle to anyone not looking closely. Dates that did not align, initials placed inconsistently, a signature that matched my name but not the rhythm of my hand. Caleb's findings were introduced next. Internal emails, vendor communications, payment trails. Marcus had coordinated with third-party clinics referencing my stored genetic material as an asset already secured. There were messages discussing timelines and contingencies, all written with the confidence of someone who did not expect resistance. Marcus's attorney stood and argued intent. He said the law was complex. He said his client believed consent had been given implicitly. He said the child had been provided for, that stability had been maintained. Helen did not raise her voice when she responded. She said consent was not implied by proximity. She said parenthood did not begin with possession. She said abandonment was not defined by hunger or bruises, but by the deliberate removal of a parent's knowledge and choice. The judge listened. He asked questions. He took notes. Then he turned to Marcus. He asked if Marcus wished to speak. Marcus stood. He straightened his jacket. He spoke about opportunity, about readiness, about how I had not been prepared for motherhood and how he had stepped in to ensure the child's future. He said he had done what was best. The judge asked him a single question. "Did you inform the mother?" Marcus hesitated. Not long enough to be convincing. "No," he said. That was all it took. The ruling came without drama. Marcus Reed's parental rights were terminated effective immediately. The judge cited fraud, misrepresentation, and abandonment. He stated clearly that reproductive technology did not exist to bypass consent, and that the system would not protect those who attempted to rewrite parenthood through deception. There was no jail sentence. That had never been the goal. But the decision was entered into the public record. Permanent. His name tied to it in a way he could not control. Marcus reacted badly. He stood too fast, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. For the first time since I had known him, he looked uncertain, not apologetic, just unmoored. He did not speak to me as he left. He did not need to. The system had finally spoken my name. I sat in the hallway after everyone else had gone. The bench was cold beneath me. My hands were steady. My breathing felt deeper than it had in months. Helen sat beside me and said it was finished. I nodded. I believed her. My parents called that evening. My mother spoke first. Her voice was quieter than usual. She said she had been afraid of what people would think. She said she had not known how to help. She said she wished she had trusted me sooner. My father told me he was proud of me. It landed differently than I expected, like a closing door rather than an opening one. At work, the project continued. The client stayed. The questions stopped. I adjusted my hours. I delegated more. I stopped explaining myself for leaving before dark. Lila changed in small, telling ways. She slept through the night. She stopped checking the door when she heard footsteps in the hall. She began leaving her shoes by the door without being reminded. She started asking about tomorrow instead of whether I would be there. One evening as I tucked her in, she looked at the walls and smiled. "This is my room," she said. "Yes," I said. "It is." Life did not become perfect. I was tired in new ways. I learned how much of my future I had not planned for. But the fear that had followed me since that first phone call was gone. Marcus faded. His company lost funding. His name appeared in filings he could not erase. People stopped returning his calls. He lost the ability to control the story, and for someone like him, that was the punishment that mattered. I did not win because I was loud. I won because I stayed present, because I read every page, because I refused to let silence be mistaken for consent. If you are listening to this and you have ever stayed quiet because you thought it would be easier because you were afraid of what speaking up might cost, ask yourself one thing. What did staying silent already take from you?